Only the video. All of you, and thank you, Dr. Ramesh, for this opportunity. So it looks like the lecture series is it's like a finale. Today's topic is very relevant considering what you have heard from my colleagues and my introductory talk. I think all of that we do in patient care boils down to one important element, which is communication. And there is so much of fuss and buzz about this communication. We oftentimes wonder what is so wrong about communication. We're all talking all the time. But I think you will see for yourself, and I'm sure much of your clinical experience also will tell you that sometimes we wonder that all that we said, did it even get registered? Have people understood? Or why is there so much of misunderstanding and so on? So obviously, communication or all that we talk, all that we say. Is a very important aspect, I think, in any human interaction, and more so for us, of what great relevance is the clinical context in which we are all in. This is an absolutely vast topic, and generally, this is my workshop topic, where the workshop itself goes on for 3 full days. So it is that exhaustive. So my effort today would just be to align all of you to some of the theoretical concepts and the broad framework that revolves around this very important aspect of communication. So that is the only exercise, because Dr. Ramesh and I are planning to have a full-fledged workshop very soon. And therefore, the length and breadth of this, and including the depth of the topic, will be exhaustively touched upon in the workshop. This is only mainly to, like I said, align, sensitize about basic concepts and frameworks that revolve around this very important topic. This is oftentimes the headlines of every morning's newspaper and the media. Of course, now Riya Chakravarti has beaten us completely. But otherwise, every morning you keep hearing about assaults on doctors, and there is so much of mistrust surrounding the medical system. And surprisingly, research evidence has conclusively shown that of all the medical errors that they have enlisted, communication problem seems to be a very, very integral part. And if I recount, one of the American studies that was published in ASCO last year clearly reported that 80% of lawsuits for medical negligence has been because of communication problem. So the second aspect is the inadequate information flow, which of course stems from the communication problem itself. So therefore, this obviously is such an important aspect in all our clinical interaction. So the fault line of us in the medical system is that we oftentimes believe, or we are convinced that patients don't trust us. They don't seem to agree with anything that we tell them. They seem to pose too many problems in one visit, and they are not compliant with any instructions we give, and they're extremely demanding and controlling, particularly in an era of internet and technology and all that. They come with this misbelief that they're very well informed, and therefore they're very demanding and controlling, and oftentimes even play around or push us to follow a particular line of treatment or a protocol that they have stumbled across. So very often we, when I talk about doctors, all of us in the healthcare system are immensely influenced by the way patients talk to us, their attitudes they bear, including their demeanor, their body language and so on. And therefore, we feel that, much of the medical legal issues are also because of what patients do to the healthcare system. So the fundamental barrier to all communication is on multiple fronts. The professional and the staff barriers, the patient-related barriers, and of course, there are cultural stereotypes and cultural mores that we are all kind of engulfed with. And obviously, while the entire medical school training is all about the technicalities of medicine, which is in the biomedical model, there is very inadequate training and education in the art and the science of communication, including soft skills. I mean, we seldom wish our own colleagues, forget about wishing our patients. So even the soft skills are missing because that is not part of the curriculum. So it was heartening when Dr. Ramesh talked to me the first time about this particular platform being used for sensitizing, young people who are kind of getting into a full-fledged medical system in the aspects of human mind, and most importantly, the art and science of communication, because it's never part of the syllabus. So alongside is also the fact, like I was talking about the cultural stereotypes, there are a lot of attitudes that are governed by social conditioning. There are myths and misconceptions that we all carry, and very often, at least in the Indian context, is the support that we offer both ways. The families that don't reveal diagnosis to the patient is obviously trying to support or insulate the child or the patient from any kind of emotional difficulties, so they don't talk. And very often we also collude with the families, because we as a medical system also don't want to deal with any kind of emotional aftermaths, and therefore we would want to kind of support the patient or the family by not kind of revealing things in its entirety. So some of these barriers that we talked about, and just to highlight on what are the patient and the family related barriers, they come with lots of myths and misconceptions, particularly in the oncology domain. Cancer is incurable, cancer is very expensive, and so on and so forth. So there are already these inbuilt barriers, which makes them not kind of discuss a lot of issues. And doctors and staff know better, at least some segment of population, people who come from very modest backgrounds or rural backgrounds, still believe that doctors are demigods. So therefore, they believe that they know the best, and we don't really have to ask them a lot of questions. And also the fear is, when I ask and if they start to reveal a lot of things, knowing a lot of things was going to kind of make me very anxious, and I really don't want to kind of understand too much about my context. That is, facing up to the reality and accepting that reality itself becomes very, very difficult. Oftentimes, it's also possible, and in a couple of sessions that I've had with some patients, where they talk about some of the misunderstandings or misgivings that they've had with the medical team, and when I tell them, go ahead and put down your questions, ask whatever you want, they say, no, we are afraid that they're going to snub us. And the snubbing is usually, what they believe is that the doctors are going to say, who's the doctor here? I know what I'm doing, and whatever I'm doing the best of your interest. I think we were also talking extensively yesterday about how all of us love to have control and power over our context, including a PPT. If Dr. Vinu or Vandana said, send out all the PPTs and we will run these PPTs for you, for me, that's loss of control, because for me, if I have the mouse in my hand and I control this presentation, I feel that much more safe. So it could be a small, innocuous, example as this, to somewhere where I'm subjecting my life, I'm subjecting my body to for whatever treatment in the hands of somebody that I don't even know. So therefore, that loss of control itself can be a huge barrier. They feel so helpless and lost in this whole system. The barriers that we all bear as professionals and who are in healthcare is also that very often we feel incompetent to deal with certain things, particularly the emotional aspects. Like I mentioned, what if the patient or the family breaks down in my office? I don't have too much time to handle this, so I feel uncomfortable. Or very often the person who delivers the bad news is the one the messenger becomes bad, not so much the message. So we don't want to get blamed. So therefore, we really do not want to kind of open up a lot of issues or questions with patients or their families. And like I mentioned, some way we also feel that while I talk about maybe the recurrence or the bad prognosis or whatever, I see it as a failure. Somewhere I think the patients would blame me that, something did not go right, either in the treatment or in the diagnosis, or, even when we delay bringing up reports by a couple of days, patients believe that in 2 days cancer will start growing. The delay happened only because it was from our side. So very often we are kind of afraid to deal with these kind of contexts. And like I was mentioning, because these skills are not given to us during our training, we are very awkward and we're very embarrassed in these kind of social clinical interaction. And of course, oftentimes what I hear, and what we all experience, it's not unique to medical doctors alone, is that we all belong to a high volume kind of setting. And in Indian context, it's just the sheer density of population of patients that we handle makes it that much harder. So therefore, we virtually have no time. So oftentimes, these are the factors that really kind of interfere with imparting complete information, which is ineffective ways of communicating the clinical context to patients and their families. So common mistakes that we make, which is again a barrier in effective communication, is giving false reassurance, because at that point we are afraid the patients will ask us a lot of questions. We tell them that everything will be all right, just get on with treatment. We will face it when we come to it, and so on. So this gives people the false sense that everything will be okay, and when things don't become okay, then that is where we get into a lot of medical legal issues. And then also, we pass value judgments about patients. This is common doctors' lounge conversation. At least typically in south of India, we have. I'm sure it is there in other parts of the world as well. In your own language, you use various terminologies to define some patients. Some we brand them as being difficult, and what generally down south we say, we call them TTPs, Taletino Party. People who really chew our brains a lot, asking us lots of questions and so on. So all of these false inference and judgments that we make of patients acts as a huge barrier in human interaction, or the clinical care that we offer. And very often we also get into these logical arguments, particularly when these Dr. Google informed patients come to us and they try to kind of challenge us with certain treatment recommendations or the protocols that we may want to use. We tend to kind of engage them in some kind of an argument, which oftentimes gives these people the false sense that, we are trying to defend ourselves, or we're trying to control them, and we are not kind of paying any attention to what the other party has to say. So poor doctor-patient relationship obviously is because of ineffective communication, which only enhances dissatisfaction in patients, brings about significant misunderstanding. It is very detrimental to quality of decision-making vis-a-vis the treatment of the patient care, as it were. And it brings about enormous amount of anxiety, fear, and anger, not only in patients and their families, but also in the treating team. We are also extremely anxious, because I know that I do get referrals where they say, can you just step in to talk to this patient? Looks like the patient is very angry at me. They don't relate to me properly, and so on. So these are my own colleagues who kind of, talk to me about these issues. So obviously we are human. We also go through our own emotions when we find that, the relationship is not getting anywhere and it's not showing any positive signs. And there are huge implications even in terms of cost, because these are patients who would oftentimes kind of, keep visiting us, make multiple visits, and, take away our clinical time. Alongside, if God forbid there is a lawsuit, then there is enormous amount of money that we all have to kind of sneeze. So therefore, communication, that is why it's a skill, seems to be the cornerstones of all comprehensive cancer care. So it is all encompassing. It does not rest only with the medical doctor or the physician. It percolates down to everybody in the hospital, right from the security onwards to the front desk, and then from all of the medical professionals involved in patient care. So approaches to medical care, particularly the topic is so relevant in our current kind of context because there is a huge transition in the way the medical care itself has undergone a sea change. Previously, the traditional approach was, the goal was just revealing the diagnosis, talk to the doctor about, the signs and symptoms, and get directed by the medical team to take whatever timely action that the doctor recommends. And invariably, the assent was given by the doctor, and just patient just followed it. And, in this belief that doctor knows best. And reassurance meant support to the patient. From there, we have just moved to the other end of the spectrum today. Now the goal is the doctor, patients and their families want to understand everything about, the illness, about the treatment, and they have multiple questions. And the patient agenda is that he wants everything spelled out. It is important for his perceptions, concerns, and expectations to be addressed completely by the entire medical system. So the patient has become an active participant, and it is a shared decision making, and it is invariably patients and their families' choice. So the support that we offer now has to be tailored to meet patients' needs. Because oftentimes I tell people that support is not what we give, support is what the other person wants. So therefore, this topic becomes even more relevant and very, very appropriate for the kind of situation that we are all in today. So communication in cancer care is so expanded, it is so vast. You have to kind of engage in multiple things. You are explaining diagnosis, you're explaining investigation, you got to talk about treatment, you need to talk about how the decision about therapies are being made. You're communicating constantly with patients, their relatives, and healthcare professionals. If you closely looked at the topic in my first slide, I said communication skills and interpersonal. Interpersonal is because, like I mentioned yesterday, no longer cancer care is multimodal or multidisciplinary. It is interdisciplinary. So the healthcare providers as a team, we need to communicate very effectively. Otherwise, it leads to a lot of misunderstandings. So breaking the bad news, and the bad news need not always be, and somewhere bad news was misconstrued for a long, long time that it is end of life care, or when you're talking about recurrence and so on. No, the bad news begins with diagnosis as well. The bad is something that makes somebody emotionally, negatively very uncomfortable. So we engage in delivering this news. We have to seek informed consent. So from the point of everything, including clinical trial onwards, this communication has to be extremely effective. But we are challenged and we deal with multiple types of people. There are patients who are angry, there are some who are very resilient, some who are very melodramatic, some who are kind of very calm, very composed, very respectful. So we have a broad spectrum of human interactions that we have, because people come with their own personalities, egos, attitudes, and so on. So we're constantly challenged, and we need to keep switching gears in the clinical context, because you would have just dealt with an angry person and the next person may be very silent. The third person will come and give you, or extend a lot of respect and understanding. So there are these multiple things happening in a single day. So we have to constantly keep making these shifts. So which means communication has to be kind of tailor made to meet each of the needs of these multiple personalities that really visit our office. So why is this communication that has been so extensively debated, talked, and extensively researched so important? Obviously, to maintain trust, because any relationship is based on trust, and trust is only when we are very transparent. And the transparency comes only when we talk, we communicate, and to reduce uncertainty, to prevent inappropriate hope, and to foster better adjustment. And of course, what is very important is to prevent conspiracy of silence. So why good communication is important to patient and family? Because what does it do when we communicate very effectively? Like I mentioned, it decreases a lot of anxiety and fear about the uncertainty that they're kind of, right now confronted with. It decreases the uncertainty about not just about knowing the diagnosis, but about the plan of action, the treatment, how is it going to go? How long is it going to go? What is the plan financially? What is it going to take in terms of, having to invest in, their health and so on? And allows patients to kind of, openly discuss their issues and concerns. And most importantly, it promotes emotional well-being, which translates into better psychological adjustment. For the treating team, of course, it increases patient satisfaction. And most important, it brings or decreases burnout. The joy of medicine is in deriving this immense satisfaction. For example, yesterday, one of you mentioned about the Zen phenomena. The Zen is not just for the patient. The Zen is something that the therapist or the doctors also experience, because end of the day, because some things are out of control. You cannot be controlling or eradicating disease in everybody, because we come with, there are so many other challenges associated with that. But if the patients have this regard for you that you did nothing but the best, and you were there to support them and heal them, that itself gives you tremendous amount of personal satisfaction, which means it decreases the burnout or this disillusioned feeling that we often get when we encounter difficult contexts clinically. So to summarize, what is it that the doctors and the patient wants? The patient wants somebody to listen. They want some amount of freedom, which is autonomy. They want kindness, they want compassion, they want respect, and they of course want information which comes from this trust and openness they solicit from the medical system and their doctors. And what is it that we all want? We also want our autonomy. We want our freedom. When we are making some recommendations, obviously we are making recommendations out of our learning, understanding, experience, and expertise. So we also solicit respect from the end user or the patient and their families. And we need time to connect because there is so much going on around us. We want patients also to trust us. And of course, they should understand that we pursue this as a profession, because obviously, while it is our life, we are also making a living out of this. The reason why I put this up in the slide is that very often patients are extremely demanding of medical care, the medical professionals, in this misbelief that they believe that they're the only one in this entire system. They don't seem to recognize and understand that there are other patients, there are other commitments that the healthcare system needs to extend itself to. So in toto, this is what both parties want. So then what then is all this boiling down to? It is boiling down to effective communication. So what then is communication? Communication, while it seems very simplistic, has these multiple components, and integral of all that, that we're talking about communication are these four important, components: verbal, non-verbal, listening, and the language that we talk. It's not so much the language as in language, whether I'm speaking English or Kannada or whatever. While that is important, the jargons or the terminologies that we use is equally important in, effective communication. So can communication skills be taught? I mean, so much has been said, and very often even in social context or in the lounge conversation, we hear that, oh, this doctor so-and-so is a very effective communicator. and he was born with these skills. There is some element of maybe the gene, but much of it is in the nurturance. So therefore, if this question is, can communication skills be taught? Of course, it can be taught. That's why it's a skill. So communications are not innate abilities. They have to be learned and a mindful attention paid to when and how they are used. So they are learnable, they're trainable, they're adaptable, just like any other skill. So that's the good piece of news that we have. So we can all be trained in effective communication. I think for anything to learn, first we need to unlearn a lot of things. So how not to do it is very important. The first and fundamental thing is that, I have so many examples to give. I've had issues where women come and tell me, I didn't even know that, this doctor was taking away the breast. And you say, how could this have happened? Somebody, you signed the consent, and the doctor talked to you. You said the doctor spent a lot of time, and how could you come and say this? The truth of the matter is, when you go back to the file, when you go back to the doctor and talk to them, they have recorded everything, and the doctor will tell you, I told her I'm going to do a mastectomy. Now, mastectomy is a medical terminology which the common man or the layperson does not understand. Why do we use those jargons? But supposing I told somebody that, listen, I'm going to remove your breast, I fear that she will run away from my office. I fear she is going to break down. I fear she will ask me a number of questions. I fear also, quote unquote, in the kind of situation that we are all in, healthcare now no longer is service. It's become an industry. So I'm always worried about losing my patient. So how else can I hold on? So this is the velvet covered hand grenade approach, using jargons. And also this hit and run, sometimes these corridor consultations that happen, because, if I bring somebody into my office, they're going to chew me up with a lot of questions and so on. So, if the report is bad, I really don't want to bring them into my office. They're going to consume a lot of time, and I feel very inadequate and, uncomfortable handling their emotions and so on. So very often, sometimes, we bump into them in the corridor. And patients will stop and ask, doctor, is my report on? Say, yeah, the HB is a little low and, something else. So this is the hit and run approach. We try to avoid patients sometimes because, like I said, we make our own judgments about our patients. Like they're judging us constantly, we also judge them. Sometimes, to avoid very deep-seated conversations and so on, which we are uncomfortable, we engage patients in small talks about, what do you think about Sushant Singh's murder? Or, what do you think, is Riya Chakravarti involved? We engage in small talks so that, we distract and divert the attention of patients so that they don't really bring on heavy-duty questions onto our table. We also try and ignore cues. Sometimes, patients really drop these mega cues by saying, so doctor, are you saying there is something serious? And, we don't want to recognize or understand the word serious at that point, because if I say yes, then, or if I ask, what do you mean by serious? Then a whole bunch of things will start to pour forth, and I really don't have the time, or I believe I don't have the skill to kind of, deal with it. Passing the buck. Very often I am associated with bad news. They will say, Dr. Brinda will handle this for you. And I get these phone calls where they'll say, Madam, report bandire, the report has arrived. The news is not good. Do you want to communicate this to the patient? So because he or she feels uncomfortable, they think that, okay, now Dr. Brinda can do this. Brinda can do it, but that's not the right way to do it. And I'll tell you in the next few slides why we should not be doing this. So again, we talked about use of jargons and so on. So therefore, these are things that we should not be engaging in. And false and premature reassurance, because the patient has just entered our office, the investigation is not complete, we don't have too many information, and at that point to kind of reassure them by saying everything will be all right, sometimes could be very damaging. So fundamentally, how do we really proceed? Then what else is effective communication? So it's important to understand some key elements in communication. What are those key elements? So we have a person who is a provider, who has a message, and that message could be thoughts, it could be feelings, it could be anything that he wants to communicate. He wants to communicate to whom? There is an end user. That's the person who is listening, who is receiving this information. Now the receiver has heard out some message that has come from the provider and in turn responds, which is the feedback that goes back to the provider. Now, if the message is flowing so well, then there is no problem. When the message or the communication or the information gets into trouble, when there are these filters, as we call, starts to interfere, it disrupts the communication flow. That is, like I mentioned, the terminologies that we use, the background noise, maybe like Prapti was mentioning yesterday. If there is a loud thud noise as I am talking, the chances are I get diverted and I don't pay attention to what is going on here. Including, a stranger, as I'm talking to a patient, somebody butts in, somebody enters my office, that itself can kind of interfere. And these, the bane of today is the cell phone. Constantly people engaging on the phone and so on gives not only this, it not only interferes with communication flow or the information flow, but also gives the receiver the sense that you are not interested in talking to me. You are not respectful of me. The phone call is more important than me. So all this kind of disrupts the communication flow. And of course, the emotional state, like I talked to you about this mastectomy example. On a single day, so much of information is given to the patient. The chances are the patient was in a state of shock, extremely agitated, extremely tense, and probably nothing just registered. They heard you out, but they did not listen to you. All of our communication need not always be oral. The medium of communication can be at multiple planes. It could be written, information that we want to impart to patients. We may want to send a soft copy of, some literature that we have read and so on. All of which, if they don't pace in time, people will be able to kind of read, understand, and appreciate it a lot better. So these are the key elements that we need to bear in mind for effective communication. We did talk about the components, and this slide, I think, I want all of you to observe very closely. See for yourself in all of this communication. Now, because, I'm on a tele platform and my video is turned off, you're not really seeing me. But if it is a face-to-face interaction, all of that I'm saying, all of that I have said, and all of that you have observed is only going to be 7%. Your attention is going to be on the nonverbal communication, which is 93%, of which 55% is in our body language and 38% is in the tone, the voice modulation, as we call, how I am talking. You will know by my voice whether I'm calm, composed, anxious, angry, agitated, or I'm in a hurry. So can you see the power of nonverbal communication? It is so important for us to be very aware of this, because communication is not about just verbal flow. So what constitutes nonverbal behavior? Because, it is 93%. And if you see all along, I'm just depicting a lot of adult pictures, and the orientation is also adult. Because in pediatric care, we are constantly dealing with families and parents who are adults. Children also need communication, but that is another aspect, and we will touch upon that as well. But all of our interaction when we're dealing with adults is also important in the kind of current context that we are all we are placed in. That is, we're talking about, pediatric care. So even here, The way we interact with patients and their families is very, very important. And the non-verbal, which is 93%, needs a lot of attention. The touch, the tone, the gestures, and so on. The last bit actually ought to be the first bit for me. Clothing and attire. And you're wondering, what is this clothing and attire? And Prapti talked about the white coat syndrome and so on. What comes very alive in my mind as an example is a very real example. When I was doing a fellowship in MD Anderson, one day I was sitting in the patient lounge, the lobby, and talking to a visitor. And I overheard a conversation where there is a daughter of a patient who's just brought in her mother for admission because she was posted for surgery for the next day. And I overheard this conversation where the daughter is pointing to a doctor who is just rushing into the hospital, and he's passing by the lobby, and she's saying, "Mom, this is Dr. John who is going to operate on you tomorrow morning." And the mother immediately, we are at a distance, it's a huge lobby. If anybody has visited MD Anderson, the foyer area is really huge. And this patient is sitting in one corner. The doctor is in the entrance at the other corner. And the patient, the moment she saw Dr. John, she's saying, "Gosh, how is this guy going to operate on me when he can't even sew his lab coat?" I was wondering, what about the lab coat? Because this conversation was so loud that it did distract my attention. And I looked at John's lab coat. The apron hem was all open and it was hanging. Fortunately, I happened to be rotating in Dr. John's unit. And therefore, I could go back to Dr. John and tell him, "Hey, listen, this is, that is something very nice about, the Western culture. You can be very open about whatever conversation you want to have." So I took the liberty of telling Dr. John, "Hey, I overheard this conversation in the hospital lobby." He said, "Oh my God, I'm not even on duty today. I was just on call. There was an emergency. I went into the locker room and I found somebody's coat and I wore somebody's coat." So the coat didn't even belong to Dr. John. So when the patient came into his office, Dr. John told her that, "Listen, this is not my lab coat. I promise to sew you up very well tomorrow morning when I operate." So can you see? Such an innocuous, irrelevant, we may think, like a lab coat hem has such a huge impact on the patient's mind. And she is wondering, tomorrow's surgery, will the suture be put properly when this man can't even sew his lab coat? You'll wonder what is the relevance, but that is the power of what happens in a non-verbal plane. So the clothing, including how we carry ourselves, is very important. The confidence building. Prapti told you that white coat shows competence. While it's a barrier for the child, it shows competence. So I think in my first talk, I was talking about, I don't know whether I did this in this talk because I've been doing so many webinars. I always tell my team, while the content is important, knowledge is something that you must have. The container is equally important. The personality of the individual is very important. Packaging is equally important. What we wear, how we carry ourselves. Take, for example, you receive two gifts. One is wrapped in a newspaper and one comes beautifully wrapped in a beautiful gift wrap. Which one would you approach first? Obviously, you would approach something that's packed so well. Right? There may be a diamond lying in that newspaper package, but therefore that is the way we all get judged. So it is important when we are talking about non-verbal communication. There are a whole lot of things that we carry with us which can communicate a lot to the person who is at the other end. So the tone in which we talk is very, very important because that carries close to 38%. So empathy, the interest that we show, all that is reflected in the way we interact with patients. Here again, there is a very live example. couple of years ago, I would say some years ago, actually 5 to 10 years back, I generally get referrals where, I have to talk to patients about cancer and stuff like that. This was an odd referral that came my way. The doctor called and told me there is this lady who does not have cancer, but this lady goes on believing it is cancer. And, she's visited me a number of times. Can you handle this patient? So this lady comes into my office with tons of, reports, the huge file. And she says, doctor, look at all my files and tell me, that it is cancer. So I said, listen, we don't treat reports, we treat you. So let's keep the reports away and let me just hear you out. And I went through the session with her. And, to summarize what happened in that session, she told me that she has met a number of doctors. And every time she visits a new doctor, she does not talk about her previous visits to any other doctor and goes through these tests every single time. So she has n number of mammograms. She's had n number of, tests and scans done and so on, because she believes she's got cancer. She does not believe these reports and does not believe any doctor. I said, okay, all that is fine. Please tell me what makes you think you have cancer. Let's forget your reports. Let's forget your doctors. She said this to me. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing you face to face, but I wish this was a live interaction, and I bring this up when we do the workshop as well, and hopefully that will be face to face. But just for a minute, just see the video very carefully. Video of me. The first time she went to meet with the doctor, when she found an odd lump in her breast, she goes to see this doctor, and the doctor has recommended mammogram and so on. So she carries all these reports and goes to see him. And that day, unfortunately, the doctor was tied up in the OT, and it was a very long wait for her. And finally, the doctor said, okay, because this patient was waiting and there was a crisis going on in the OT with some other patient, he's supposed to have asked her to come into the anteroom of the theater. So the patient comes there and waits, and this doctor is wearing all his scrubs and so on and emerges outside. So this surgeon who came out picked up her mammogram film, and he's supposed to have looked at the film and said, oh gosh, it's not cancer. Right? He has said it is not cancer. But the patient's contention is, if it was not cancer, why did he sigh? Why did he click his tongue? So fortunately, since I know the surgeon very well, I could go back to him and say, hey, this is what has happened. He said, oh, that day I remember distinctly. The sigh was because I was relieved that this young lady does not have cancer. And I was exhausted because it was such a long OT for me. So I was just tired and I just sighed. So the doctor on his part is absolutely right. He was tired, he sighed. He was relieved that this young patient does not have cancer. But what did it do to the patient? While he has uttered the word, it is not cancer, that has not got registered. She is going by these non-verbal cues of, the sigh and the click of the tongue. So therefore, the power of non-verbal communication is something that we need to pay attention to for effective doctor-patient transaction. The next important element when we talk about good and bad body languages, of course, we will be going through all this in the workshop, but quick read of the slide is, maintaining eye contact. When we talk about smiling, now again, smile should not be inappropriate, particularly when we are delivering the news of death and so on. Obviously, if you're smiling, then that can result in a lot of anger. So it is a appropriate context, and in the context of the person that we are dealing with, we will have to kind of streamline and customize our interaction with patients. So most important, of all is, I think, listening. And I'll just kind of, just to drive home this point, listen with curiosity, speak with honesty, act with integrity. The greatest problem with communication is we don't listen to understand. We listen to reply. When we listen with curiosity, we don't listen with the intent to reply. We listen for what's behind the words. I believe this is a very, very powerful statement. Very often, I have patients coming and telling me, thank you very much. And I wonder, I didn't even have a session with them. It was not even, I had exhaustive sessions with them. Why are they thanking me? And I say, why are you thanking me? They'll say, you listened. So when I ask you to listen to me and you feel you have to do something to solve my problem, you have actually failed me. Strange as they may seem, listen. All that I asked was that you listen, not talk or do. Just hear me. Sometimes just that ventilation kind of helps people. So I believe the first art in communication is listening. If we have listened, we have really understood. And if we have understood somebody, then the chances are we may be able to reach out to them better. So effective communication between doctor and patient is a transaction. It is a partnership. It is togetherness, and it's a lot of involvement. And that can happen in the context of oncology, particularly when we're talking about pediatric care or all of oncology space. We're constantly discussing multiple things. We're discussing diagnosis, talking about treatment. We're talking about several, treatment protocols and clinical trials. We're talking about, the toxicity of treatment. We're talking about prognosis. We're talking about what impact it can have psychologically. We need to talk about logistics. We need to talk about cost. And in some unfortunate scenarios, we're even discussing death. So there are a whole spectrum of things that we are kind of constantly discussing in clinical care. And therefore, clinical context is extremely challenging because we have to build this rapport, we have to establish this trust, and the information that we deliver has to be correct, complete, concise, clear, all in this, enormous amount of time constraints that we all have. So therefore, how do we make this happen? There is this constant dilemma, how to say, where to say, when to say, and whom to say it to. So do we tell these compassionate lies, or we dole out merciless statistics? So what's the right thing to do? The right thing to do, the best thing to do, is the most uncomfortable thing to do. And there is no one right formula for this. But having said this, when we talk about how these skills can be trained, broadly, I think what we need to understand for effective communication is it's not just information delivery. We need to balance, particularly two important elements, that is our cognitive and the emotional readiness of patients and their families to receive this information and to align this with their own backgrounds and their value systems and needs, as it were. So it's an absolutely kind of a balancing act that we will have to kind of take care and make sure communication and the information flow is effective. So good communication and effective communication fosters trust, it fosters hope, and of course it fosters good adjustment. For this to happen in the given time frames that we all have, classically what exists in the domain of communication, there are n number of models. The popular ones are the 5 E's and class principle, which is very effective in the clinical context, as it were, the clinical interview, as it were. What do these 5 E's and the class principles say? They say engage. What is engagement? Building rapport, building that relationship with the patient. Elicit always first the patient understanding before you talk. That is what is the listening. What is it that you know? What is it that you want to know? What is it that you have understood? That itself will help you to understand what they know, clear up all the myths and misconceptions so that it becomes easy for you to just bridge those gaps by educating them, of offering those fillers, as it were. In that discussion, you will also see what kind of emotional reaction they are having. If they're saying, doctor, I think it is cancer, and they break down, then you know how to reach out to those emotions, either by you or by making sure that they're kind of, streamlined to other subspecialties or, services such as ours. Enlisting is actually telling the patient, what is it that you are going to do as a doctor? What is it that the nurse would do? What is it that the front office would do? And what is it that you will do as a family and you will do as a patient? That is where this collaborative approach helps them understand that there is a whole team participating and that they are an important element in this participatory, healing process, as it were. The spike principle is invariably used in delivering the bad news, as it were. This is a very, very popular, model. The setting or the context of anything is very important. Like I was mentioning, if you're talking to people in the corridor, if you're talking to people in a noisy outpatient, then the chances are we have introduced so many filters there. There is a phone, there is a noise, there is constant intrusion, which will all interfere with, imparting that information and for effective communication. So you have to earmark, particularly when you're delivering serious news to patients, to say, come at such and such a time, come and see me in my office. And when you're meeting them in your office, make sure your phone is in silent mode and the doors closed. Make sure that, people don't kind of keep barging into your office. And then start this transaction of understanding what is their perception, like it talked about, eliciting patient understanding. An invitation is to ask them, what is it that you want to know from me? What is it that you have not understood? That is exploring their knowledge and understanding, and to empathize and say, yes, I understand. It's not an easy time. I understand, this is very unexpected. I understand the disappointment. Exploring their emotions is actually giving them an understanding that you empathize with them. Then a strategy must be in place. That's a plan of action. Now that we have understood it is cancer, now that we have understood that the prognosis is not too good, my plan of action would be, first I would do this, second I would do this. Then to summarize, the summary, invariably, it's a good idea to get it from the patient or the family. What is it that you understood that we have discussed something in the last 15-20 minutes? Let them summarize. Then you will see for yourself that there are some missing gaps or there are some misunderstandings which you could kind of clarify. And once that is done, you need to, summarize the entire proceedings. These are things that I said. This is what you had understood. I clarified this misunderstanding, and this is what we are all kind of going to do now. Believe me, if it is done in this way, the chances are not only that the patient has trusted you, even if the news is bad, the patient believes that you were there to kind of, support them. So these are broadly the models which we will go threadbare when we do the workshop. So all of this effective communication, the bottom line is it has to be a therapeutic alliance. What is a therapeutic alliance? Compassion, care, empathy, understanding that we extend, and most important, the respect that we extend to our patient and their families throughout the cancer trajectory. It could be diagnosis, it could be bad news, it could be good news, it could be a crisis, it could be a bereavement. If we extend this compassion, then we are in a therapeutic alliance with our patient. Coming to the pediatric care, I think some elements of it was handled by Prapti yesterday. Communication, again, with infants, toddlers, and young ones are generally by touch. And that touch is very, very important. It relieves them of their pain. It communicates trust. It communicates compassion. There again, when we want to touch them, I think it's a good idea to ask them, can I touch you? Right? Because inappropriate touch also can cause a lot of other problems and mistrust. So particularly with adolescents, it's important to engage them. You have to educate them. And when we talked about education yesterday, you saw even in the video that for each of these children, I had to get down to their level to explain what exactly we are going to do. Now, if I tell them I'm going to take you through radiation, they won't understand what radiation is. So I had to use light treatment. Okay? And light treatment is what the child understands. And therefore, she was going home, opening out a torch every evening after she's finished radiation. And for her Barbie doll, she was doing radiation treatment. Right? So jargons, terminologies have to be age appropriate. And all of this communication is developmentally related. So there is no one quick fix to all this. So it has to be customized based on the child's need, age appropriate, not just of biology as well as chronology, as it were, but also the psychological or the emotional, development of the individual is very important. Once we have their active participation and empower them in active treatment decision making and make them responsible, that is where you need to tell them, see, with your cooperation we can come out winners, and will you participate, will you cooperate, and at any point I'm available. Put down all your questions, bring up those questions to me, including when they enter your office, a handshake to say, young man, good morning, how are you this morning. What we do is we are so busy dealing with the adults that we forget these young ones. So it's important that the communication in the pediatric domain with children has to be age appropriate and has to be streamlined accordingly. So the collaborative effort seems to be the most effective one. See, if they miss something with the physician, they can revert to the psycho-oncologist. If they miss something with the psycho-oncologist, they can go back to the social worker. If they miss something there, they can go back to the nurse. So ideally, what needs to be done and what we do generally in HCG is that we sit as a team when we are imparting, particularly quote unquote, the bad news. So in this collaborative participation, what happens is that the chances are, if the physician has missed something, when my turn comes to talk, I'll be able to say something. Or when the physician was talking to the patient or the family, I, as a psycho-oncologist, I'm busy reading their emotional aspects, and I can give him this input by saying, you know what, I don't think she understood anything. She looked very blank. Okay, so this collaborative participation, the teamwork really seems to kind of be very helpful, very effective, and making this transition even to kind of, palliative care and end of life care becomes that much more easy. So what are we saying? While medical science has limits, hope does not. If a patient is ready to be helped even a little, it enhances the doctor's commitment to fostering a relationship between equals. I always believe that a meeting between a doctor and a patient is meeting between two intellectuals. Ask why. The patient knows a whole lot of things about his body. He may not know the terminology and the jargons. We translate his experience into black and white and dole it out as a report and put a sticker saying it is carcinoma, melanoma, whatever. So it is actually the meeting between two intellectuals, which is meeting between two equals. Only such a relationship bonded by understanding and respect can deepen into a true healing partnership. So in summary, communication skills are associated with good clinical outcomes. Good news is skills can be learned, but they need to be practiced to be perfected. Class principle is something which is kind of very extensively used, an acronym that is used for clinical kind of context where you're doing a clinical interview, clinical examination of patients. This model seems to be very effective. Bad news can be delivered using Spike's model. Emotions are normal reactions to hearing negative information. So it's okay for patients to emote in your office. And you can be a powerful tool for giving that support in times of crisis, of hearing the bad news. Patient will be grateful for your support, which will also make you feel better. Breaking the bad news, if we do it badly, the patient or the family members may never forgive us. If we do it well, they may never forget us. So that is the power of effective communication. Thank you. I'm open for any questions and discussions.
Brinda, it has been a
Yes.
mesmerizing talk. It has been a
Thank you.
mesmerizing talk, and you brought out a lot of points, which I feel is not necessarily confined to only pediatric oncology or maybe even clinical practice, but many times when even life situations.
Right.
What you said about treating the other one equally and the way you can communicate, empathy, what you communicate beyond your words, the language, what is said. Okay, all those things are
Right.
beautifully applicable even in any relationship, friendship,
Absolutely.
or maybe working with colleagues, or maybe working with your partners, wherever. I think it has been an outstanding talk
Thank
and
you.
extremely insightful, not just in other things. A few things which really I really admired particularly are two things. One, support is not we give, but what they need.
Yeah.
Most of us as doctors, we live in a cocoon saying that, okay, we think we are the best, we are worked out, we are hard pressed, we don't have time, there are so many patients, etc., and we think we are sitting in an ivory tower and dole out something which we think is the best. It may be
Right.
the best, but may not be what they're looking for. So
Absolutely.
unless we make it, it is not right. So that one really struck me.
Thank
Second one
you.
about the content and the content. Always
Mhm.
tell. I call it a different word. I call it substance and style. You
All
require
right.
substance, and then require
Yeah.
style too. So unless
Absolutely.
you have a combination of the two, it won't work. After two, of
Right.
course, substance or content is more important, but
Right.
it's also equally important to package it well. I just
Right.
now open this house for discussion. I think everybody can participate, please.
Good morning, sir. Dr.
Yes, Anil.
So, as you said, it's a mesmerizing talk.
Thank
When the
you.
talk started, some of the questions were running in my mind, but at the end of session, so you are covered beyond our imagination, madam.
Thank you so much.
Uh, See, in the communication, what you covered most of the point. So,
Mhm.
when to communicate what is also very important.
True.
For example, as soon as we finish the surgery, we just come out and try to explain each and everything what
Mhm.
happened in the OT.
Mhm.
So when you go to the post-operative ward, they'll be asking the same question again. See,
Mhm.
that means they won't be in a frame of mind to accept
Mhm.
whatever we want to tell.
Mhm.
So what point to tell at what time is
Mhm.
very, very important, what I feel, man.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
In fact, I've got too many slides. Like I said, this is a workshop topic.
correct, correct.
There are studies which have shown that, particularly on day one, the moment of truth begins for them then. They're in that shock phase. And in that phase, when you're delivering the news, nothing registers. Because just then, the hammer is banged on their head and they're still dizzy at that point. And that is a point where we are talking a lot to them by talking about the diagnosis, the treatment, and so many investigations and stuff like that. And that is what I meant. Nothing registers, and they're hearing you out, but they're not listening.
Very true. Like you
Correct,
said,
correct.
instead of people focusing on just conveying, I think they should be communicating. It's not just
Absolutely.
about telling things, but about to see how best they can. This happens
Yeah.
to all of us because when we come out, like my boss Srimurthy sir used to say, when you
Mhm.
come out of the theater and tell them the patient is over, I mean
Mhm.
surgery is over, first thing they ask is they're all of them running through is okay, the patient alive.
Yeah.
So they're not bothered about anything else. Then you say,
Right.
okay, it went off well.
Mhm.
Then after they shifted to the ward, the focus shifts on whether they're eating well, passing motions. And after about 3 days, once that is all right, they start focusing on the cockroach in the room. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you need to address it that well. I think you brought it up brilliantly.
You
Thank you, Anil.
know,
Anything more you want to say? Yeah.
No, actually, I wanted to just add, see, even while breaking any news, I mean, in oncology space, of course, all news is bad news. Very little of, good news is not a difficult thing at all. We all like to kind of communicate that. See, truth, like I had mentioned, is like medicine. It has to be titrated in doses and it has to meet the individual's need. It has to be given in bits. We need not talk about everything in one meeting.
Yes.
Then it becomes very time consuming, because considering that we all have time constraints, good idea to say that today we're going to focus only on this aspect. So we will talk about your investigation today. Once the investigation reports come, then we will spend some time to understand what the report has to say. So if we streamline, then it becomes easy. Two is also to tell the patient that put down all your questions and come. Then it becomes easy. Otherwise, they're rambling in your office and you become uncomfortable, and it goes on endlessly. So some of these things, if you plan, it can be done very effectively.
Yeah. In fact, this one tactic I also use many times, especially when I'm counseling them antenatally. They have a lot of questions which keep running in their mind. Or sometimes about surgery, I realize that there is a very argumentative or the TTP that you said. So sometimes what I do is I know that, okay, I said, okay, I understand that this is too much overload. But anyway, what I suggest is go home, sit and discuss, put it all on question paper, in a paper, and come and talk to me tomorrow.
Right.
Many of them do. And at that time, they're very clear about what they're going to ask. So I think it goes a long way to talk to their listening rather than to talk to our wish.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sir, one more point.
Yes, please, Anil.
Regarding the points what you are mentioning, sir. So always see, once there is a disease, there is a positive point and a negative point involved in that.
Yes.
So I try always talk positive aspect more, because once you start the negative point, so as much as your positive point you tell them, that won't get registered in them. So try to talk more positive, so you get the confidence of you and the communication you build up. Then at the end you start telling the negative points, and they try to accept and they believe you at that moment.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's a balance, well balanced. Correct.
Yeah.
See, other point, always Ramchandra sir used to tell me, whenever there is a problem with a patient, go near to them. You become more closer to them, so that you can find out the problem, and the problem you can face later also can be avoided. As you go away from the patient, you are going to lose the patient, and lot of miscommunication and the problem which exists.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Brilliant. Waiting for others to give a comment. Narendra, I see Narendra is there. Ramchandra sir. Raju Saudi.
Yeah, if I can say this.
Yeah, please.
Sir, your voice is breaking.
Lot of disturbance.
Am I
Yes,
on?
now better. Yes, now better. Now better.
Somebody.
Please go ahead, Raju.
Hello.
Yes, Raju. Yes, Raju, we can hear you.
So we can't.
Raju, again we'll ask. No, it's not audible. Raju, see if you can put on a headphone. One more thing I wanted to tell Brinda was, I think what you highlighted most important was, when you're talking to people, make sure that you're going to have that concern conveyed to them, that you are interested in the patient. The words don't matter, the grammar doesn't matter, the language doesn't matter. But if you can just convey to them that you are concerned about the baby and you are really making a all-out effort, they will definitely trust you. In fact, like my boss Shrimurthy sir says, the biggest tribute to you is they get their next baby to you even if the first baby has died. That shows amount of confidence, and all of us know how many of them do get. That way, I'm extremely happy about my team at Indira Gandhi, because most of the places in government hospitals, you tend to see them asking, talking to them brusquely, trying to say that, okay, that superior attitude, they just don't answer, they don't counsel well. Whereas I'm very fortunate to have a team at our institute, at least the surgical team, who is actually very empathetic. The counseling, you should see the way they counsel them, they talk to them. Nobody is brushed off.
Very nice.
So, in fact, I'm very proud that that is a sort of culture which is inculcated in everybody. And thanks to my colleagues and my students and everybody. In fact, they have done a fantastic job.
That's
So I
really
think
good.
all that
Yeah.
required to be conveyed is be concerned about a baby, conveying it and communicating effectively. I think that goes a long way. Anyway, I'm waiting. Raju, have you fixed your audio issue? Raju? Raju? Ramchandra sir? Ram sir, any comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that during our training, we never had any formal. I think Ramesh, you need to mute your mic. There is heavy breathing in your mic.
Okay, I will do that.
When we were in training, we never got this communication skills or anything like that. So we were sort of observing and learning how to communicate. And very often we had two major classes of teachers. What you could sort of grossly describe as the doers and the describers. So the describers had excellent communication skills, whereas the doers were usually lacking in that. Whereas as a surgeon, I would like to be closely associated with the doer, but I would also like to know what the describer has, that extra skill. So it is a fine balance we had to do as we were in our apprenticeship as residents, to sort of shadow both the doers as well as the describers, because unless you learn how to do surgery properly with the doers, you will not be able to describe it in the literature or to the patient later unless you know how to talk about it. So these were the things I had to observe. I had to communicate to you today.
Lovely. Thank you. Anything from the postgraduates? Because ultimately the classes are originally meant for them. Anything from the students? Vandana, Dimitri, or somebody? Raju, you got your this thing fixed? Rajendra, you wanted to say something, Savji? Raju is finding it difficult to communicate, I guess. Okay, if there's not much other discussions, I think we'll wind it up. Rajendra, try again. Savji? Brinda, I think. Sorry, Raju. We'll hear about you some other time. Okay. Thank you very much, Brinda. We will have definitely. I think Rajendra has left. Okay. Brinda, thank you very much. It has been a very, very useful session, and we are really looking forward to having this sessions in the future. We will have it. I will be in touch with you sometime, maybe next month or so. We'll start having this.
Sure.
And
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
And best wishes for the entire team of Cowper for your new ventures.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you so much. My colleagues and I are very grateful to you that you gave us this platform, and most importantly for recognizing this very nascent science of psycho-oncology. So it's a real shot in the arm for us. Thank you, and we would be very happy to be associated with you and your team for any of the future, academic as well as the service exercise that you plan.
Thank you very much, Brinda. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Thanks.
And Prapti and Revati also, thank you very much. Revati,
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramesh.
yeah, thank you. It was lovely having you.